So I've dealt with the sort of fire escapes and that sort of thing, which is to say microphones and cameras. I'm going to tell you that the session is being recorded. So hopefully nobody has any objection to that. And I'll tell you just a little bit about how we're going to unfold the evening. To begin with, we'll speak to Lily and Zoe, who are the people who've made this whole thing, I think, put this whole thing together, and brought all the contributors in. And I want to know how and why, and I'm sure you do as well. We then go to the contributors themselves, or some of the contributors who have very kindly offered to read out extracts, and Lily will be taking care of that. After that, you have a chance to put questions that you may have. The way we're going to curate this is if you can put your questions into the chat function, then Ennis, who has already had a shout out, will curate them and I will read them out basically. If you want your question addressed to a particular speaker, make a note of it and I'll do my best to honor your wishes, and we'll get through as many questions as we can before we conclude. I think that's probably clear enough. Just need to say that the material and some aspects of the conversation are strong. They deal with strong issues of human experience. And so I feel obliged that if you have any really deeply seated particular sensitivities, then just be alerted to the fact that we're dealing with raw humanity as it is. Okay, good. Well, I can't see everybody nodding, but I assume you are, and we'll proceed with speaking to Lily and Zoe, who you'll see on the screen. So I have a simple question to begin with, and I open it, I suppose, Lily in the first instance, perhaps. Where did this whole thing start? You need to unmute yourself, as they say.
There we go. Thank you, Robin. Well, I'll start with that because it kind of started with something that I did, which some of you will know this story already. And it just started with teaching voluntarily at Hackney Recovery Service in Hackney on Mare Street. Creative writing, I was teaching to a group of people who are recovering from addiction to drugs and alcohol. And I felt quite compelled to do this while I was going through a marriage separation and grieving my father, who had died very kind of spectacularly from alcohol poisoning over a sort of very condensed and intense period of about 3 or 4 years. So I wasn't really sort of aware of what it was that was pushing me to this, but I just felt I wanted to enter into that community a bit and give something back. So anyway, I taught in this group for 6 weeks and it went really, really well. And then they wanted me to continue, but I couldn't carry on doing it without getting paid because of my circumstances. So I applied for Arts Council funding. And we were successful with that, which was amazing, which was when I brought in Zoe and a couple of other teachers to come and help us sort of, create a program. And we carried on teaching for about 9 months, I think. And then part of the bid from the Arts Council was also to, have more of an outreach. So we came up with the idea of putting together an anthology or creating an anthology. So we did this nationwide call out and of recovery stories. And it started with stories of recovery from drugs and alcohol, but then it extended out into sort of mental health, mainly because obviously drugs and alcohol issues are very tied in with mental illness and problems. So we felt that there was a crossover in that. And we had a few cases of sort of physical illness as well, but it was primarily about drugs and alcohol. So that sort of took us through the next stage, and that was a big long process, and then we had our book, which is now here. And I suppose what I would say mainly talking about this was just that I just felt really strongly, particularly from the group that I was teaching, the initial group at the service, was that there was such powerful writing coming out of that group, and the students were not formally educated in terms of having done creative writing MAs and courses and stuff, and yet to me their work felt more pertinent in a way. It was so powerful, and And I questioned whether it was because they had been through, they'd been through a lot of therapy, they had key workers, they were in abstinence programs, they were having to really, really look at themselves and be very honest with themselves. And I wondered whether that was part of the process, that they were ready, by the time they came to me, they were ready to really face their experience, and it gave their work a real power. And I wanted to be able to put that work out there in the world. And of course, when you get the Arts Council funding, you have the question of, their standard is artistic excellence. So you have that question of, how can we get work that could perhaps be a sort of self-expression, confession, a kind of outpouring. How do we mentor these writers to get it to a point where it's publishable, where we can put it in a book? Which Zoe and I did do. We worked closely with some of the writers to do that. But also, I'm so proud of this, because we wanted it to be a hardback. We wanted it to be a beautiful product. We wanted it to be something that the writers could be really proud of. And I think Unbound have done an absolutely brilliant job. So I'm just so thrilled. So yeah, that's. I hope that kind of covers the foundation of this project.
It does, wonderfully. Thank you, Lillian. It seems to me that you came at it in a way slightly accidentally, not really knowing what was going to happen next. But there were two foundations. One was the need, your own personal need, to address questions of trauma and recovery, and what we've termed and dismissed in a way as a term that disrupted narrative. And that was an urgent question for you, but also the literary perspective. You came at it as a writer, and this whole project has been underpinned by a respect, a love for the written word, for writing itself, and at its most excellent form. So, Lily, Zoe, you are involved in the literary pursuits and have been for some time. Zoe came on board with this. Can I just sort of go back a little bit in time to ask where your joint efforts began? How did that happen? How did you begin to collaborate? And obviously it's been so informative to this project. Can you give us a bit of the origin story?
Should that be to Zoe? Should we ask Zoe?
Zoe, yeah, okay.
Of the origin story of the book was.
Well, I'm sorry, I meant of you and Lily working together.
Yeah, Lily working together.
It's London Lit Lab, isn't it? Sorry, I didn't phrase that very clearly. Yeah.
Which yeah, kind of sprung out of us being writerly friends, having met in a writers group in the very first place. And we started to teach together like 5 years ago, I suppose, and sharing the group at the Hackney Recovery Service was a huge part of how we kind of cut our teeth, I think, and got better at thinking about getting those two things, honesty and experience, to come together with writing and technique, and kind of learning to do that together. We did a lot of teaching together to start with, which was a great pleasure, and very reassuring, because we were absolutely terrified when we started. And so moving from just teaching to editing an anthology together felt like quite a big deal. It's kind of, you can't just shrug your shoulders and say, oh yes, we'll do a national call out, we'll ask all these people to send their work. Suddenly you have this huge responsibility. But sharing that has been really important for both of us, and being able to rely on someone else and compare what you're reading, and also really interrogate those issues that you mentioned, Robin, about this being about really good writing, literature, and skill and style, and all those things that we really care about and try to achieve in our own writing, and wanting to see that in the work that we were going to put in a book that we would feel really good about. So I guess that combination of writing, critiquing, teaching together, and then looking at this material together as well, and getting to know a whole new group of writers that were outside of what we might be doing in London Lit Lab courses, was really informative, but definitely made easier by doing it together. And that's still the case with everything to do with London Lit Lab.
Well, I don't want to boast, but I remember inviting both of you to deliver a session at a postgraduate writing program that I run at the university, and saw you in action, teaching and mentoring and helping people to understand how to get to grips with the literary arts. I also know you both as writers, and it seems to me that this book, this project, is a place where those two aspects of both of you come together, that you're both helping other people to discover how to write, but it becomes an act of writing in itself that you're helping to curate and edit. Would either of you or both of you just like to comment on that a little bit, what it's meant to you in those terms?
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point, actually, Robin, because I reflected on this last week or so when me and Zoe we're coming up to 5 years of London Lit Lab, and we had this big day directors meeting, which wiped both of us out. I had to lie down afterwards. And I was thinking, you know, it's like this book has become our, it's our beautiful kind of project that's come out of our union. And I think it does do all of those things. It has the heart and soul that we both feel so strongly about in our teaching, and yeah, mentoring and openness, and you know, and I think it is part of our personality. It's part of what we put out into the world, and obviously it was more in line with my pursuit, in my own personal pursuit, in my own writing, the whole idea of recovery, and you know, I was looking at alcoholism and my own creative project, the book that I've got a memoir coming out next year about my dad, and about those issues. So it was very much kind of, you know, the subject matter was more coming from my place, but you know, Zoe and her wonderful grace, as she has always had in herself, but also in our relationship, has just been there alongside me and has been this amazing rock to me. And that, you know, that's been the story of our kind of union of working together. It's been two people who really believe in writing where it matters. So yeah, I think that's absolutely true.
I would add to that as well that like everything that we've done with teaching, I think without fail, I end up learning an awful lot from the people that I have on courses. But putting this book together, and especially for me, you know, right from the beginning of getting to know everyone at Hackney Recovery Service, and then getting to know the material that we've put into this book, has been well, humbling for obvious reasons, but also I've learned a huge amount about how massively effective different other approaches to writing are, and also non-fiction and autobiographical writing, as well as fictional writing, all of which is represented in this book. And so I think just having our socks knocked off by all the things that we read and what we chose to put into the book together was eye-opening, and it's been amazing to kind of go through that process, and then by the time this book finally arrived, feel like, my God, you know, we still go back and look inside it and think, our eyes fill up a little bit, and we get very excited about what's in there. So that's a wonderful and cheering thing, but to be an editor of such amazing work.
It is amazing. I mean, I love it, you know, which is hold it up again. So let's talk about the book itself. It's an anthology. It's a collection of different voices brought together into this single volume under a consistent theme of recovery. And it's brilliant. The voices are extraordinary and the content is wonderful. Can I ask you then, simple question really, how did you find these people? How did you choose? I know you went through the recovery processes, Lily, but how did you choose this material? How did you curate it? Can you talk about that process of actually working on the book itself?
Well, I think
to both of you, I'd love to hear from both of you.
I mean, I'll start this, Zoe, and then you can take over. But I think, you know, the really lovely thing about me and Zoe, again, you know, without sort of blowing our trumpets, is that we never really planned anything. We just sort of like, you know, London Lit Lab came out of a conversation in a pub, and just having faith, really. And this book is the same. I mean, you know, we had money from the Arts Council, which was amazing, and then we sort of put out a call for submissions on Twitter. And like anything else, it just starts to sort of build and have its own momentum, and word gets round. And then suddenly we found ourselves, you know, with a lot of submissions and a lot of really high quality, interesting submissions. So, you know, sort of having started quite small, we then had quite a lot of choice. So that was a really interesting position to be in, where we, you know, it was like, okay, well, let's look at what we've got. This is really strong for this reason, this is strong. And then we could start to curate it. And that was great. And then, you know, and we didn't really plan, but then through the process of reading the material, we came to decide what we liked and what, you know, what the book needed to represent. So I'll pass that over to you, Zoe, because you wrote about this in the front of the book as well.
Yeah, I think we were a little bit apprehensive about a whole book driven by the theme of recovery possibly being a hard read emotionally. And I remember taking a deep breath before I sat down with that first big pile of submissions from the call out and thinking, I need to read this when I'm, you know, I'm feeling up to it. And I think that it tells you something about my expectations, and they were wrong. What was extraordinary was the sheer range. There was barely a repetition of topical theme across all those submissions, which is obviously more than what's in the book. So that was an amazing thing. It was also amazing to kind of realize that while we'd been very focused on the theme and what had driven creating this book in the first place, and thinking about the people who would be submitting the work, the overall impression was these are writers who happen to have recovery in their experience, but that isn't sort of the defining feature here. And that mix of fiction, non-fiction, memoir, poetry, subjects that range all over the place, but also an incredible range of styles, was so amazing and satisfying and incredibly exciting to read. There's so much humor, there's sheer entertainment. I mean, these things surprised me, and that was a wonderful thing. Pleasure and obviously huge amounts of emotion. And something that Lily had talked about before we began this process, but which I really came to understand by reading the work of the writers that we've put in the anthology, is that even when writing about personal experience and difficult or intense personal experience, once a writer has achieved a certain amount of kind of distance or perspective, or an ability to frame that experience through a literary form, not to sound too grandiose about it, but, you know, focusing on style and structure and words, then suddenly it becomes an unbelievably beautiful thing, however difficult the experience is that's sitting in the writing. And we saw that time and again, and realized that, you know, that it's that is an indicator of quality, as an incredibly exciting thing to read. And we found we had all this ready to go into a book. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Lily?
No, I think that says it, definitely. I think it was that was the thing that we came to, definitely, was that, you know, was there enough distance? And I think that is that question of you know, how you get beyond just a sort of confession or a diary entry or something that you haven't quite kind of processed. And the pieces that we chose were definitely, they had that sense of art, or, you know, of form, or whatever, a kind of self-consciousness, I suppose, without that sounding a negative thing. But yeah, that was very much.
Well, we're venturing into quite highfalutin territory here, but I'm thinking sort of, why not? For a moment, it's really interesting what you're saying about the relationship between the personal experience and the literary form, and how that transforms both of them, actually, that the personal experience and the literary form come together to create what they call something beautiful, something amazingly beautiful. And this is the sort of territory of memoir at its best, which is a fairly new phenomena in the British literary landscape. And I know, Lily, you've been working on this, and Zoe too. So can you just talk a little bit about the importance of perhaps this book within the context of memoir as a literary genre? I went into a bookshop recently, a big bookshop, and they didn't have a memoir section. When we asked, they said, oh yeah, I think it's in biography. So can you talk just briefly, I guess we don't have a lot of time, about that?
Well, I'll say something about, because I have been thinking about this a lot recently, and I think it is. I think what really appeals to me about this project, and and the product that we have, and if I think back about my intention again of what I wanted to do, was that directness. It's the honesty, it's the getting to the core. It's not beating around the bush, it's not sort of hiding. You're there, you're facing it. And that's certainly what appeals to me with memoir, is that there's this willingness to explore yourself on the page, and have a conversation with yourself. And I think that's what is making current literary memoir so interesting. And I think it's very tied in with our interest in psychology and psychoanalysis, and asking the question of why, and trying to understand. And we're all in that place, a lot of us. I know not everyone, but a lot of us are. So even though not all these pieces are memoir by any means, we have a lot of fiction in here, and poetry, and they all have an honesty about them, I would say. Even the fiction is going to quite difficult places and not being scared of that. And yeah, I mean, on a personal level, that's what I'm interested in. Not everyone's interested in that, but it's doing that in a generative way. It's doing it in a way that is giving something back, because you're learning through it. You yourself are opening yourself up to whatever that process is offering, and I think that becomes quite a generous thing to the reader as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of memoir. It's not really Zoe's area at all, is it, Zoe?
No, but then that's what's been amazing about this process, right from Hackney Recovery Service to now, is that, as you mentioned, within the group that we were teaching and writing with at the St Mungo Centre, people were bringing something extraordinary to the table in the form of honesty, but also kind of self-knowledge and a preparedness to hit the page completely open and just go for it. And the effect of that, it was just that extraordinary things would be written just in an hour and a half sitting around that table. And so that, that was really important. And for me, as someone who has been more and still is quite fiction focused in what I'm writing, to see that and realize, this is what's making this work great. It is self-knowledge, self-awareness, and guts, basically, being prepared to dig around in yourself and then put it on the page. And yeah, I find that personally terrifying, but I hope that at some point I ever have the guts to do something, like that people in this book have done, whether they've written fiction or memoir. You're right that there's something in there that grabs you, and that someone is speaking directly to you, and I love that.
Yes, here. And yes, there's fiction, there's poetry, there's all sorts of different genres represented in the book, but they all have this authenticity. They all have the sense of the author being on the line, speaking from the heart and divulging their truth, which is wonderful. Well, okay, that's, I think, our cue really for me to hand over to Lily to begin to invite the contributors to share some of their work. So Lily, handing over the baton to you.
Thank you, Robin. And I'll just say also now that if any of you have questions, I think Ennis has already put a note in the comments section. If any of you have questions as we're going along, please put them in comments. Ennis will be looking at them as we go along, and she'll be compiling them for Robin to ask the contributors, or me and Zoe, in the final section of the evening. So don't hold back. So I'm going to introduce the contributors now. We've got 5 contributors from our book. Our book has 49 contributors in it, and we're very lucky to have 5 of them here today. And really, I sort of I didn't want it just to be about reading tonight, because you can all buy the book, or you've already got it and you can sit and read it in your own time. But I sort of wanted it to be, an opportunity for us to really reflect on what writing means to us in our own recovery or in our own lives. And I know that all the contributors who are here today have some views on that. So we're going to start with Gary. I'm just going to read out his bio briefly. So Gary was in the original group, in the Hackney Recovery group with us. So we're really, really grateful for Gary to be here today. Another of our writers, Susie, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, she was also in the group and produced some really wonderful writing as well. But Gary is representing Hackney Recovery Group, the original group for us tonight. So Gary's a queer ex-heroin addict turned horticulturist, musician and Buddhist. He still writes, but more often expressed in the form of music or art nowadays. He's working towards a career in horticulture or music therapy with anyone who has a need of it, but especially with LGBTQ plus young people. So Gary, you can turn off your mic now. I just really wanted to ask you, I mean, you've written really on it, we've got a blog, and Gary very kindly wrote about his experience of recovery, you know, his own personal experience of recovery, and a bit about his and what writing meant to him. But you know, just would you just maybe share with the group here, you know, what that group at the recovery service meant for you, the creative writing group?
Yeah, it was really important. I kind of fell into it. It was, I think, there was some serendipity about you guys had started that, but not long after I I was a heroin and crack cocaine addict, and I ended up 4.5 years ago. I had to have emergency open heart surgery and nearly died. But it was the moment that I stopped using drugs, and I think I was only six months into my being, you know, drug-free when I was told about the creative writing group, and somehow managed to pluck the courage up to go. And the same as you guys, was really blown away by some of the writing, and it was a really important outlet, creative outlet, because I consider myself more of a musician, but it was my first creative outlet, and so it was very kind of raw at first and very fact-based, I think, because I was just trying to process such a lot of trauma of like nearly dying, of suddenly being who am I now without my drug addiction title, just loads of stuff really. And I think it was a really important part of my recovery at the time, and I'm really grateful for it, and like big up the Arts Funding Council for creative projects like this for marginalised people. They're really, really important. Yeah.
Did the group kind of become a bit of a lifeline for you? Because I know for Susie, you know, it just became something that was a really sort of positive part of her week, and she looked forward to it. Because I know you were there for a good couple of months, weren't you, with us?
Quite a while. It's about 3 or 4 months, I think, on and off. Yeah, it was great. It's when you come out of such a long time of, like, I refer to it now as like post-heroin and pre-heroin, and there's just like this 20-year gap in the middle where I didn't really grow as a human, you know, spiritually, psychologically, and when you come out the other end of that, it's such a trying to fit back into a normal life and be a productive member of society. It's just it was a really important part of that process. And yeah.
Well, I remember Susie saying something similar, that it's like when you have had something that's been such a prevalent part of your life, you know, and taken up so much of your time, like, you know, whether it's alcoholism or, you know, whatever is preoccupying you for those years, that actually when you lose that, there's this big hole and you have to fill that somehow, you know. And I guess that's where, you know, I don't know, you might start a new career, or throw it into a relationship, or discover something new about yourself. And I suppose that was what I was hoping, you know, also just sort of introducing writing to a group of people who had this potential, you know, and all these amazing stories as well, that actually that it could somehow sort of start to fill that gap. I mean, obviously it's not going to entirely fill the gap, but it's just a little positive thing that starts to sort of feed, you know, more of a creative part of itself.
It's something that not many people are interested in doing. Funding mental health, you know, struggles as it is, funding addiction services is at the bottom of that pile. And I think there is a balance to be struck between providing medical-based services, but also something for people that maybe are a little bit more creative. I was going to say something else, but I've forgotten.
Do you tend to find that now through your gardening? Is that where you find your release?
Yeah, lots of things. Gardening, music. I play piano. That's where I kind of put my energy into, and I volunteer in the community and stuff now. My life had just completely changed. So actually reading this, I hadn't read this piece in the book pretty much since I'd written it. So it almost feels like a different person. It made me feel quite uncomfortable to read, because it is, my life has changed completely from back then. So yeah, I don't know.
And Gary, you worked on that a bit with Zoe, didn't you? Because Zoe sort of took you on with the mentoring, and you did a bit of work on it with her on that. Was that helpful to you? Did you learn through that process?
Definitely. I think it's a really important. I hadn't really had a history of writing. I think I've always had I've always written notes, and I've always written words for songs, and I've always written bits of music, but I'd never specifically written to try and get across the trauma that I've been through onto a page, and it's hard. It's hard to do it well, and I just think it was a really important service to have been offered at just the right time that I needed it, because you are trying to fill your life with positive things and just different things, because like being a heroin addict takes up 8+ hours a day. So when you don't do that anymore, it's like you need to find a role in life. So I've spent the last few years forging myself a role in life, which has been amazing. And I never thought it would happen to me. So it's all the more exciting. It's the whole thing's a bonus, really, because I honestly thought I'd be dead by 40. So to be at 41 and to be nearly 4.5 years clean is like mind blowing. And then to be in a book is just crazy.
Well, congratulations, Gary. Really, it's really lovely to hear that as well. Would you like to read your piece?
Yeah. It's quite short, and it is quite brutal. It's called Begging for Change. I was often drawn to that desperate place. It mirrored how I felt inside. I was always in a rush to get there after buying my gear. The stink of stale piss and booze, used dirty needles crushed into the cracks of the concrete. I smoked roll-ups made from butts scavenged off the pavement and injected heroin and crack into the hole in my groin. Further up under the train tracks, it was dark and quiet. I'd hide sometimes to use, alone. Years of practice, I could cook up and get out within a couple of minutes, already back off begging while others were still struggling to find a vein. Sat leaning against a bin facing the door of Tesco, asking for change, with head hung low and back slouched. Sometimes I'd see an old neighbour or someone I knew. Pretending I was retrieving something from my bag behind me, I'd try and hide my face. I still had some pride. Even the sex work was better than this. Rain starts, collecting in between those concrete paving slabs and slowly working its way towards me in my cardboard seat. Soaking into my jeans until I can bear it no longer and have to leave, whether I have my money up or not. People darting into Tesco, wet, dripping umbrellas, wanting to get out of the rain and home to get warm. At least you had to have a home to go to, I'd think, envious and angry at them for ignoring my existence. Sat alone, wet and hungry, begging for change.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gary. That was brilliant and really, really well read. Thank you. And also, I just wanted to say, I love the images of your lovely dog on Facebook that you pop up. Can you just tell us his name? Is it he or her?
Chaplin's.
Chaplin.
Chaplin's a little girl.
That's a girl.
Yeah. She's not dogs.
She's very much part of this process as well, I guess.
Yes, very much.
Thank you so much.
Dogs and plants, that's me done.
Dogs and plants, sounds perfect. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to Rob. Rob was one of our contributors from outside of the group, but I just loved his stuff immediately. And I think you sent us a couple of things, Rob, I can't remember, but we did have a bit of a choice of what to choose. And then as the process of the book developed, because the whole thing took so long, Rob just started publishing his work in all these places. So I kept on having to check in with him. It's like, Rob, have you published this one already? Yeah. Okay, can we see something else, please? Okay. So he'd send me another couple, and then we'd say, oh, these are great. And then like a couple of months later, they were also published. So Rob's done absolutely brilliantly. So I'm just going to read you his biog. Rob True was born in 1971. Unable to read or write very well, he left school with no qualifications. His wife taught him how to use paragraphs and punctuation aged 40, and he began writing stories. Please, yeah, and he's had a book published, which was a while ago, your first one. Just remind me of the name of the first one, Rob.
Gospel of Aberration.
Gospel of Aberration. And you've got a new one coming out, The Shadow of Phosphorus Dawn, which will be published on the 27th of May. So that's
right, yeah.
Close, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Two
Rob,
books.
2 books, it's absolutely brilliant. So Rob, I remember when we met in a cafe, me and you, and had a chat, didn't we, about your relationship with writing, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I just wondered if you'd tell the group a little bit about, you know, your history and what writing has done for you, because I mean, obviously you came to it late because of sort of poor education, and was it dyslexia that you had at school?
Yeah.
And then it sort of opened the world for you, didn't it? Things started to sort of look different for you when you could put stuff on the page.
Yeah, it was like giving a key to a new door. It was it's like being able to do magic. I just found, I mean, I've got a history of heroin addiction, and I'm also schizophrenic, and it was a good way to take all that sort of darkness and horror and do a magical process whereby you could turn it into stories and come out with something positive at the end of it. And it was a creative outlet that I hadn't had. I'm quite a creative person naturally, and for years, I mean, apart from years of addiction, in between, when I got clean, I spent 20 years working on building sites, and there's not a lot of room for creativity on there, on a building site. Apart from the creativity of doing the building work, but in terms of art and that, you work hard all day, go home and you're knackered. And writing was like a new outlet for me, for all the creativity that I had in my head that I've been keeping to myself for 40 odd years. And so it was great to be able to start sharing it with people and being creative and coming out with a physical object at the end of it, and making books and stuff.
Yeah, you kind of you sort of developed this character, didn't you? This character called Theron. Does he appear through both of your books? Have you carried on? Was it just the first one?
Yeah, just in the first one, yeah.
And did you find that sort of characterization of creating someone who was separate from you, but maybe processing some of the things that you were going through yourself, was a helpful mechanism? Like it was, because you talk about it being separate from you, this experience, or whatever trauma you were going through, you could kind of put it over there through the process of writing. Was that part of that?
Maybe, but I think the thing is some of the stories I wrote in the first person, and then some of them I thought it'd be more suitable to write in the third person. So it was more dictated by that, really. Mm-hmm. If I was writing in the third person, I had to give the character a name, and I didn't really want to give it my name for some reason. So I called it something else. Theron is from the Greek for beast. So I just thought it was quite a good name.
So he was exploring a dark side of you as well, I guess, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And in terms of sort of having your work out there, like actually having books, like coming to writing really late. I mean, it's amazing that you've done so well, Rob. It's such an amazing achievement.
Thank you.
What did that feel like for you, just to sort of be thrown into that whole kind of literary world and have people giving you feedback and critiquing your work and all of that? Was that generally a really positive thing?
Yeah, it's nice. It's a strange thing. I've really enjoyed it. It often seems strange to me that I can do it now, because before I found it almost impossible to write. I did try and write previously to my wife teaching me, but I just didn't have the techniques, the mechanics to do it. So it just come out like gobbledygook. Didn't mean anything. It was not readable. But yeah, it feels really good to have people say that's really good and everything. You know, when you do a reading or they read something of yours or whatever the situation is, and other people enjoying something that you've created, it is quite a pleasant experience. Yeah, it does all seem strange to me. It's because I'm sort of from a different world, you know. I've never got educated or anything like that. So, you know, a lot of the people involved seem to all have degrees and, you know, be well educated and come from different backgrounds to me, which is good. But it is nice to be recognised and have people saying, yeah, that's really good, and enjoying what you've produced.
Well, the thing I was really struck by your work, and we'll listen to one of your stories now, is just how strong the voice is. And I think it's because you're not trying to replicate anything other than yourself. You know, there's a sense of you being very embedded in that voice. And I think that's what gives your work so much power. So Rob, do you want to read your piece?
Yeah, sure, yeah. This is called End of an Episode, straight out of the book. Drill, rule plug, 500 millimeters. Drill, rule plug. Darren holding the other end of the trunking, supporting the weight as Ferren puts a screw and a washer in place. Trying to ignore the vision repeatedly flashing in his mind. Hanged brother, sweat, death face distorted, purple, lolled to one side on stretched neck, slowly swinging from rope. The horror breaking through bricks and metal and screws. In goes another drill, gun, rattle, bang, hanged brother, level up, down the ladder, hanged brother, move along and up the steps again, hanged brother, concentrating on the screw, rattle of gun through sight of Paul hanging, Darren drilling a wall across the corridor, sound shattering echo through Paul swinging peacefully. Ferren climbs down to get more trunking, and as he bends over, he sees the boots in front of him. He straightens to see Paul there like an apparition, solid but ghost-like vision. Paul is telling him something, but there are no words, just a strange alien noise as Ferren tries to comprehend, slowly aware of Darren talking to the client nearby. This is not real, he repeats like a mantra in his mind as he wraps knuckles to his forehead, trying to dislodge the reality before him. That evening, he lies in a bath, trying to wash away the pain. He's meeting a friend at the 10 Bells and has to catch a train. Ferren dresses himself while in a trance. He looks at his hands. They don't belong to him. And he's surprised to see them as they change from transparent luminous to rotting colour of old flesh wound. On the train, Ferren is struck by ridiculous excitement that everything is amusing and absurd. Everyone's like hideous puppets. He watches out the window, dream journey back through our ancestral past as the track takes him through ancient towns of dead relatives. He sees the backs of houses in place of the slums where they'd once lived. There are gaps too where more recent blocks of flats that he'd once knew had been demolished. He remembers dramas of life and death, delusion and disaster, beatings and delirium. And Ferren feels like he's in an alien world different from what he'd known and understood. As the train passes through a tunnel, the window becomes a dark mirror. Ferren looks into his own empty eyes and sees the abyss, infinite and terrifying. He notices a young couple laughing together behind him. They are laughing at him. Anger wells up, fierce as fire in his blood. He turns to look at them, but they won't look back. He stares madly at the man, trying to catch his eye, provoking conflict. Are you fucking sure? I'll smash your face through the back of your head, you cunt. He sends this violence telepathically on laser beams through his eyes. The man looks away laughing, and as Ferren goes to get out of his seat to attack the fella, he's stopped dead by a terrible scene. The whole carriage is looking at him. Every couple, every group are all talking about him, laughing at him. He is at one end and can see the whole length of the car. All those faces mocking, judging, sneering. Dream vision of smirking masks. Ferren is both livid and afraid. Violence in a nightmare show. It seems like he's in a film. An old couple right opposite him are laughing too. Frail and decrepit as they are, he wonders how they would dare to deride him so obviously. The train stops and the lad who first laughed gets up and makes his way off the carriage. Sorry, excuse me, thank you. Polite as you like. It don't make sense. His behaviour doesn't match Ferren's understanding of an enemy belittling him. He looks back at the rest of the carriage, everyone minding their business, chatting and laughing, but not at him. Confused, he can't escape his anger. The train pulls into its final stop where Ferren gets off. A wave of hurrying humans, ugly and vivid in electric light glare of rude, abrasive station atmosphere, swarm at the train he's leaving. Echoes of movement and voices as they come at him. Ferren wants to lash out and smash their heads. Just one of you get in my path and I'll beat you to the fucking floor. But none of them do. They part before him like magnets repelled. One look at his face is enough. In the pub, as the first pint goes down, Ferren levels out and begins to relax. The rest of the night is spent pouring lager all over his adrenaline to put out the flames rushing up. Saturday at home, Ferren in the dream room, staring at nothing. The colours are strange and the odd air moving in slow currents and eddies around him. His wife and son, unreal somehow, seem distant and out of reach. It's like he's seen it all from another dimension. He wonders if he is even really there as he looks at Jake playing and Jane clearing up. With their sounds slightly muted, distorted scene beyond communication, it's as though he's watching through a thick glass wall. He thinks if he knocks on that wall, they might not notice. Why are you staring at me like that? Jane says, annoyed by his intense atmosphere. Ferren knows that now that Jane and Jake don't like him. They don't want him around anymore. He feels his isolation and loneliness among the two people he loves most, and he's lost. His eyes float off into a desolate depth of dream blue walls, and Jake looks up at him, curious fear. He knows his dad behaves oddly sometimes and isn't like the other dads, but moments like these make him uneasy. Ferren laughs at nothing. It's a crazed laughter and he has no idea where it's from or what it's for. Maybe it's just laughter at life, absurd and meaningless. What a joke. Nonsense. His laughter trails off and tears spring up in his faraway eyes. Nowhere gaze in oblivion face, then roll down his cheeks. Jane sees his despair and comes over to put her arms round him. She holds Darren tight and he cries quietly into her dress. It's okay, sweetheart. It's all right now, she says. And like the words of magic, they sweep the darkness away.
Well done, Rob. That's a really, really well read. Thank you so much.
Thank
it's so
you.
powerful, that piece. Thank you. And I just want to say before we move on that your work also it has such a sort of strong tension between the internal and outside world. You know, the world as seen through Theron's eyes, which is obviously very different from the world that's happening around him. And I think you do that so well. So thank you.
Oh, thanks.